Dean Myers from VIZWORLD with an update on a 2D animation software package that has some terrific new features. The biggest news? How about a demonstration of 2D character animation that lives in a 3D world with natural smart movement? Here's an overview of version 10 of Smith Micro's AnimeStudio Debut and AnimeStudioPro.
Dean, nice to meet you. My name is Fahim. I'm the product manager for AnimeStudio. Since you'd like a full overview, what I'll do, Dean, is I'll start off with a little bit of history about AnimeStudio. I'll show you what AnimeStudio is all about, give you sort of our claim to fame or our value proposition, and then maybe show you some other features. Feel free to interrupt me at any time. Let me show you a quick example of the power of AnimeStudio. So here is a video that we created just a little while ago. We hired a professional animator that uses AnimeStudio, and I will play it, and then you'll get a feel for what it does. So as you can see, AnimeStudio is a full 2D animation program. You can create all sorts of animations with it, but we mostly focus on 2D. And here's another example where physical products such as felts were brought into the application, and they were rigged and they were created into a nice little animation. The animation that you saw a second ago was actually a vector-based animation. This one here, somebody actually cut out a bunch of felt patterns, took images of them or pictures of them, and then imported them into the animation and turned it into a nice little Earth Day digital card that we created about a year ago. In fact, this particular animation won an award, a Telly Award, for its messaging. So it's quite unique in that sort of sense. So those are just two examples. We have a plethora of other examples that I could show you, but I wanted to let you know that there are two versions of AnimeStudio, and there's a debut version. I'll show you a quick box shot of it so that you can see what it looks like. You'll have access to all these assets. The debut version is $49.99. And it is a lesser version, a limited version of the Pro application. And a lot of users that do use it are mostly in their teens to early 20s. And it's a great introduction to the world of animation. So if you could imagine somebody wanting to purchase a video game, they could also purchase an application like this. Ideal for parents that want to help out their kids to be able to develop their artistic skills. So in my opinion, and the opinion of a lot of people in my industry, I think animation is a better form of sort of creative artistry versus just playing a shooter video game. Some people may argue against me, but I think it's a great way of sort of expressing yourself.
And these you have versions that run on both the Windows platform and the Mac platform?
Absolutely, yes. Both of these applications are Mac and Window oriented. So that's the screenshot or the box shot for AnimeStudio Debut. This here is the box shot for AnimeStudioPro. So, and this is the Pro version. The difference is that this is $299. There's a lot more features. There's a lot more pro-oriented concepts that are being used in this application. So, for instance, we have physics. We have a longer span of time that you could animate in. You have multiple rendering options in here. You have tools that don't exist in the debut version that I'll explain to you in a minute once we get into the application. And then there's a plethora of other things that Pro users would use. For this particular version, we're seeing the demographic being approximately 25 to about 50 individuals as well as studios use this particular application. What we've noticed is what's really unique is that there's a lot of people out there that create not just film work. That's really been the main sort of focus of animation the last little while with Pixar and what have you, full feature length movies. and that's what's getting exposed out there. But really, there's a lot of commercial work. If you watch any commercials on TV, you'll notice a lot of animated 30-second clips. And so Anime Studio fits right into that particular segment of people that are professionals, but that want to create 30-second clips, and they want to be working on their own. They don't have a major team. So a lot of the content that we've been seeing usually is anywhere from 30 seconds to about a minute long. That's a lot of the content. But as of late, what we've been doing with the application is we've been introducing a lot of pro-oriented features so that we could break into the studios, and so that we could break into major institutions such as Disney, and so that they could use the application on some of their work.
How are you faring with educational institutions? Both there are two kinds: those that would be, let's say, dedicated to the field, and such as School of Visual Arts has a whole division that'll do that, and then or CalArts, and then you have other schools which just in general might be. Are you making approaches with them? Have you made connections and found interest with them for the Anime Studio product?
Yes, absolutely. That's a very good question. In fact, we have traditionally had an education program that we're actually focusing on a lot more now. And in the past, it was a smaller piece of our focus. AnimeStudio Debut, in fact, the previous box that I showed you, was really focused in on the retail market. And we sold, hundreds of thousands of units per release, because people would walk into Best Buy or the Apple stores, and they would pick up a copy of the product at $49.99. But due to shrinkage, and due to the fact that there's less and less people walking into these sort of stores and purchasing more product online, we're seeing a sort of shift, like literally a paradigm shift in terms of people purchasing this product. So now the heavy hitter, or the product that's being purchased a lot more, is actually the pro version. And so how does education come into play? So we're noticing that a lot of educational institutions are contacting us directly, and we really have two product offerings for them. We have the here you go, let's get started with animation, and what we usually do is we provide them with a debut version, and this would be like a high school or something, maybe even an elementary school. We've gotten inroads in there. What we do is we supplement the product with a curriculum guide. So we also have a curriculum guide for AnimeStudio10. And so a lot of these instructors and students love the fact that they can use sort of a syllabus to go by with the curriculum guide, and then they show the concepts of animation to these guys. So we have quite a few examples of schools that do that at the elementary, at potentially the middle school, and very much so at the high school level. So that's pretty much Anime Studio Debut. But with AnimeStudioPro, because things are turning around, have a bigger emphasis on the pro market, we're making inroads with like the Academy of Art, the Savannah School of College, or the School of Art and Design, all these other places that use AnimeStudio Pro in their classrooms, and we provide them support. And we're seeing a lot of it, surprisingly, outside of the U.S. We're seeing institutions in the Netherlands, we're seeing institutions in South America, in particular in Chile, Santiago, and in Brazil, all the major countries that are coming up, including India, China. We have some major inroads that we've made in the past year in China in educational institutions. So the BRIC countries, if you please. So those are the countries that are really coming up and using the product at that level, and we're providing them support, and we see the purchases coming through our website, and we're seeing multiple licenses being sold to educational institutions. So yes, it's definitely on. We have a bigger mandate in that area this year and going forward.
Great. Well, let's take a look at the product.
Yes, let's have a look at the product. So I will actually bring up the product right here. Let me show you the core concept of the product. What really differentiates Anime Studio from any other animation program is really its rigging capabilities. So if you look at the interface right here, it's very much standardized. You have your top row of menu items. On the left-hand side, you have a bunch of tools. On the right-hand side, you have your color swatches, and then there's a thing called the library here that has a ton of content in the application. So if you go in here, you will notice that there's just a bunch of content that you can go through. There's characters, we have props in here, all sorts of props, from food to mouths to eye sets, anything that can help anybody get started immediately with animation. So one of the things we realized is that folks that do get started in animation have a hard time creating their own content. What we're trying to do here, especially new users, is provide them with a set of content that they can use right off the bat. Ultimately, it's up to them to use this in their artwork or in their animations, but most of them just learn from the content and add to the content or create their own content. And then they go off creating their own animation. So as I was mentioning, we have a ton of images that people could use, like trees and what have you, props, actually audio files, specific audio files that people could use. And then we have video clips that people could use, like special effects, like over here we have an explosion. All that stuff can be used inside the application, and it's preset, it's pre-built here. And then we also have a ton of scenes, and I'm going to go through all of that with you in a few seconds. Some of the scenes here are amazing and great to learn from, even if you're a pro animator coming in from, let's say, another application like Flash or Toon Boom. So going back to the core concept of Anime Studio, really, the program is a vector-based application, very similar to what you would see in Illustrator. Unlike Photoshop, Photoshop is a raster-based application. So in this instance, let me quickly draw something for you, and then you'll get a feel for what it is and how rigging works. So this is basically a block, rectangular block, and then if you could imagine it being an arm, and if I wanted to rig it, and if I wanted to animate it, in the past, I would actually have to create the image over and over again and move it through the timeline, sort of like frame by frame and flipping through a book.
Right, traditional sort of onion skin classic animation where you have to draw everything always from scratch.
That is correct. What we're trying to do is we're saying you don't have to do that anymore. You draw once and you basically rig it with bones. And then in this instance, I just rigged it and I can animate by, if this was an arm, I can just move the timeline here. And then I would move this, and you notice keyframes are created. I want to go back here, I turn this around, a set of other keyframes are created. If I want to bring it back to the center, right there, these other keyframes are created. And if I go back in time here, if I play through this animation, you'll notice that that was just created.
Mm-hmm. And it did, I'm able to view it perfectly, just by the way, so that's good.
That's excellent. And in fact, one thing that's really unique is I actually had the bounce mechanism on here. So if you notice, you notice bouncing here. If you're noticing the bouncing, I set that up inherently in the app, in the keyframe because I selected it. I can actually make it a smooth animation. So if I click, I right click on my keyframe, click on smooth, it's going to be a smooth animation here. If you notice that. And then I can do the same for all my other keyframes. Right-click them, make sure they're all smooth. And then if I go back and I play, completely smooth animation. And if I don't want it to be smooth, I want it to be sort of jittery or staggering, I can select stagger. And if I click on play, it's going to stagger all the way through. And in fact, these are new concepts in version 10. So as I'm showing you the core concept, I'm showing you some accessory-based features that were developed for AnimeStudio 10 where you can actually add that stagger, add that bounce. Those would have to be built in, even into AnimeStudio. If you were to create a particular animation, you'd have to actually build that in, and that's quite complex. But we're trying to automate as much of it as we can, but at the same time, we're leaving a lot of flexibility to the user. So that's the core concept. So how do you apply this to a character? Well, let me bring up a character that's been fully rigged in with our application. So this here is one of our latest characters. She is a pirate. So if you notice, her whole body has been rigged all the way down the bottom here. Now, we have this very interesting concept in Anime Studio. It's called Smart Bones. And Smart Bones allows you to do rigging once and apply it across the timeline. So what does that mean? Let me show you what Smart Bones are, first of all. So all these bones that are on the outside here, these are all called smart bones. And so if I manipulate this bone, you'll notice I have a complete head turn here. If I'm moving this, you notice the body's moving. If I move this, you'll notice the mouth moving. Now what's amazing is all of this is done at frame 0 in here. So if you have an animation and you have particular movements that you know you'll be doing throughout the animation, you can set that up all in advance, all before you actually start animating. So by doing the head turn, by doing the mouth open and closed, by allowing for movements in the body at frame 0, and even closing the eyes here, moving the eyes from left to right, what you're doing is you're setting up your character so that whenever you do animate, you're able to adjust these points here, these smart bones, throughout the animation. So what I'll do is, you notice all these keyframes are created in here. I will show this character to you as it's animated, and just watch all of these smart bones as they're going through the animation. So I'm going to play it. So that may be a little too fast, but if you notice, all these smart bones are being manipulated as this character is moving. And so what that allows somebody to do is, so let's say I'm at frame 51 here. I'm able to animate. There's no keyframes here, but I'm able to adjust this head turn, and there will be keyframes created here. So by setting up my character with smart bones ahead of time, I'm able to scrub through the timeline, make adjustments as I wish throughout the timeline. Rather than me manipulating each piece here, each bone, I'm able to control the bones by having them set up with smart bones. So this is a very strong concept in AnimeStudio. And in fact, this was created in AnimeStudio10, the smart bones concept, and it's become extremely popular. And we've expanded on it. In the past, you could only do smart bones for bones, or you could only manipulate bones with smart bones. But now you can manipulate all sorts of things, including color, including variations of things inside the layers. You can manipulate tools, all sorts of things. And so we're opening up smart bones to a lot more than just manipulating bones. So here's another example. Actually, let me go to this example here. So this here is a robot, and he's a new character in the application. He too has been rigged with smart bones. So if I show you and how I manipulate the body, and notice how everything is moving with the smart bones, even his hands, his feet, everything here. Even his eyes here. Let me bring up his eyes a little bit. The same concept as before. And so he's a longer animation, so you'll likely see a little bit more smart bones movement as I go through it. So as I'm playing the animation, you'll notice all the smart bones are being adjusted here. It's hard to notice, but they definitely are. And that's how, animation has really taken off with AnimeStudio. And this is something that's a very core concept in 3D animation, but doesn't exist in 2D. We're the first tool that's ever used this sort of concept in 2D animation.
I was going to compliment you. It's very interesting that you've taken the concept, because I'm seeing very clearly that, for instance, when the head turns, that there's actually even though it's in a 2D environment, there's still a 3D concept of the shape, size, dimension, and volume to the head and to the body and so on and so forth.
Absolutely, yes. It was quite difficult to do this before, even within AnimeStudio. A user would have to really rig this up in a way where it would take a lot of time. And imagine having having moved throughout the timeline, you'd have to adjust the head at each individual point. But by having the rig already set up, you can move it just with a click of a smart bone or a move of a smart bone. So just to show you this application, it is actually in 3D. You notice that? So our canvas is 3D, but the actual character is just a 2D application, or 2D image. So you can bring in 3D objects in AnimeStudio. So we have the Poser SDK in the application. So Poser is a partner application of ours. And so you can import Poser content in here. You can import content from any application that's 3D as long as it's an OBJ file. And then we do have an interesting concept in AnimeStudio. It's called extruding. So you could draw a flat object, but you could extrude it to make it look like it's 3D. So we have that concept. It's rarely used, but it exists in the application. We have some other interesting things as well. We actually can render out stereoscopic 3D. So if you wore those red and blue glasses, you can actually see your animation in 3D. So we allow for that as well. All right. So let me show you some other stuff in here. Let me show you something very, very cool here. This is something that I think you'll be quite impressed with. So in seeing that we're moving more towards a pro route, we noticed that a lot of animators are still traditionalists. You know, they're still using, let's say, Photoshop, or they're using Manga Studio, which is another one of our key applications. That's an illustrative sort of tool. So people are drawing. You're familiar with Manga Studio? Okay, perfect. Excellent. So people are very much coming in from that world of, hey, you know, like I draw normally, but how do I get my drawing, you know, so that I can animate it? And I really don't want to draw a scene 10 times over. I just want to draw it once, but I want to bring in my art form, not in vector, but in raster. So Anime Studio allows you to bring in art from Photoshop directly in real time. So if you're working on a Photoshop file, let's say, and you have Anime Studio open and you import that Photoshop file in Anime Studio and you're conducting changes in Photoshop, while you have it imported in Anime Studio, those changes will appear live. That's the real-time media connection with Anime Studio and Photoshop. Now, we import PSD files. So if you have Manga Studio and you're exporting to PSD files, the same concept exists as well, because Manga Studio allows you to export to PSD files. So we import PSD files. And so in this instance, this particular artist created this scene, which is included in version 10 of the application, all in Manga Studio. He's an avid Manga Studio user, and he wanted to prove to us that he could create a beautiful scene in Manga Studio and bring it into Anime Studio and rig and animate the whole thing. So I'll play the whole scene here, and then I'll show you how it was rigged. You know, when you think of this application, or when you think of this particular drawing, you're like, you know, how did he rig all this sort of stuff? So if you look on the right-hand side here, I have all the layers. And basically, you bring in all the different pieces of your animation or of your art from Photoshop. Make sure that it's broken down into, let's say, the hand, you know, the arm, and the different pieces. Make sure that all those pieces are in different layers, and then you can automatically rig all that stuff. Well, not automatically, but you can rig all that stuff using Anime Studio. So in this particular instance, we have Bug Boy here, who's the character here. And if you notice, he is completely rigged. All of the pieces in his body are rigged with bones. So you see all these bones here. So this really helps somebody out that, let's say, is not let's say he's a traditional animator, but doesn't want to bring in or doesn't want to create art in Anime Studio, but would like to use another application. And so in this instance, this character was created once in Photoshop, but the hand was probably created a few times because I have some more animation to the hand and to the body, and then basically Anime Studio helps by rigging the character and bringing it in. So that's a pretty profound feature in Anime Studio, where you can bring in art from other applications. So this same artist also wanted to showcase how you can do traditional, as in traditional to Anime Studio animations in here. So we have a cool little scene here that I'll play for you. And this is basically, you know, a vector-based animation.
Where's all the cheese? Couldn't you wait for me? It's the quick and the dead, my friend. The quick and the dead.
So this one was not, you say this was not rigged with bones, or this was?
This was completely rigged with bones,
okay,
but was not created in Photoshop.
Okay.
This was actually a scene that was created in Anime Studio. All these characters here are actually vector-based characters.
Got it. Okay.
So all the tools on the left-hand side, the drawing tools, were used in order to create this. It wasn't drawn in Manga Studio or Photoshop. And as you noticed, you probably were not able to hear it, but AnimeStudio also supports sound. So in this instance right here, you have all the sound files, if you notice the waveform in here.
I did see them. I saw them in the previous, they were in the previous one too. So he had done the complete animation right down to the synchronization right there in AnimeStudio.
Exactly, absolutely, exactly. That's you have all that access. You even have lip syncing options in the program. So, for instance, if I really wanted to, what I could do is I could, create a new file here or a new canvas, and then I can import some mouth shapes or create my own. And let me just import some. Oh, here we go. Let me close that up. So right here we have a bunch of props. I can bring in some mouths, and if you notice right here, all the mouths are in here. We have a thing called a switch layer in here. And then basically what I can do is I can actually get into recording my own voice from within AnimeStudio. So it's got a voice recording tool as well. So, hello, Dean. It was really nice having you here today to listen to all of my talk and spiel about AnimeStudio.
Is the lip syncing all done manually, or is there any sort of smart detection of audio? I mean, that may be asking for too much, of course, but I was just wondering, considering the whole rigging system, I have to tell you that I think the rigging system is absolutely a terrific advancement for animation.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate that. Yes. So the lip syncing is actually automatic. There's two automatic forms of lip syncing in AnimeStudio. There's the automatic lip syncing that you could do within a switch layer. So what a switch layer does is it allows you to pick a set of files and to go through those files based on the pitch. And then we also have another system called Papagayo. And Papagayo is another automatic sort of manual system that allows you to be a little bit more refined. And that's another installation. So we actually provide a link to that from our website. So you would click on the Papagayo link, and then you're able to download Windows or Mac versions of that. And then you install it on your computer. And then once you record your voice, you can actually use the images or the artwork that you want and apply it to the pitch however you like.
Interesting. Great.
So that's Papagayo. A lot of people do use Papagayo, and there's a lot of traditionalists that don't want any automatic lip syncing, and so they do it themselves. So we have some videos on that too. So what I'll do is I'll share those with you so that you can see that whole process. I'll actually take a note of that right now. Okay, and all right, perfect. And then the other thing that I wanted to mention, so AnimeStudio also has a physics engine, so you can simulate things falling down and actually bouncing around, and you know, that whole ragdoll effect character. So that's available in the Pro version. You have 64-bit architecture in the application, so it definitely works and takes advantage of 64-bit machines. We also have GPU acceleration. So when I was showing you all the import and export, or sorry, the import of the Photoshop files or the Manga Studio files, that all requires a lot of intensive memory. And so we try to take advantage of the GPU in order to make sure that it processes it properly. And so we have GPU acceleration in the application. We also allow for images to be traced. So for instance, if you have an image that you are very keen on on adding and making sure that it actually is vector based. So like for instance, this image here, it's just a pure image that I brought in. I can turn it into a vector based image automatically. So by clicking on the trace image functionality. So this is vector, completely vectorized in the application, and I can add a rig to it and start manipulating it automatically. That's pretty popular for folks that are using the debut version. We have, I mentioned the content library. It's got a ton of content in there. And we have another cool feature in the application that is connected to Wacom products. So for instance, if you are a user of a newer Wacom tablet, whether it's a Companion or a Cintiq or even an Intuos that has multi-touch capabilities, well, we actually have the multi-touch SDK inside AnimeStudio.
Oh,
so
terrific.
you can, yeah, so for instance, here's a great example of what you could do. So we have a tool called the Blob tool, and you can actually draw with your fingers. You can draw blobs and what have you. And so it's a great way for youngsters to get started. And basically, the harder you press, the more likely the blob is going to get bigger. You know, so we're very much connected with Wacom tablets, and in fact, we were the first people to incorporate that concept and the multi-touch stuff in our application, and hence some of their products actually support and are bundled with AnimeStudio. So that's really cool.
Well, that answered an interesting question. It did indeed, and I'm also going to be looking at some Wacom products for readers of VIZWORLD soon too. So I'll definitely have to pull up AnimeStudio and demo it with the. I've got a 22-inch HD unit, the touch unit that I'm going to be reviewing. So that should be really interesting.
Oh yes, absolutely. And in fact, you know what's really unique is whenever you have a Wacom multi-touch unit connected to AnimeStudio, there's a little icon and checkbox that appears right here on the left, and it actually tells you, do you want to enable multi-touch or not? It's really, really fun, actually. Yeah. So kids love it, especially when we go to trade shows and we turn that on, and kids are just going all over the place and drawing with their fingers. So it sort of introduces youngsters into our application. And some of the pro users use it as well. You know, they use it for different things, for managing the canvas and moving things around. So there is definitely a pro base that uses it. And then some of the other things that we have, I'm just going to blurt out to you, and we could always share videos on these. And in fact, if you'd like, just let me know. We have motion tracking, so you can actually bring in a video, and let's say you don't like the head of somebody, and you don't like their head, and you want to replace it with like a monkey's head. We use like a pixel generator that looks at a particular pixel, and that person throughout that video will always have a monkey's head or something else's head, you know, or some other object. So that's a very cool concept. We have scripts in the application. So for instance, in here, you notice that it says scripts. So the majority of these scripts are written by users. And what they do is, if they want to create their own type of tool or their own mechanism as far as how AnimeStudio works, they definitely have access and can definitely do so.
That's great. As I see something in there, this is now the other side of building animation, is things like storyboarding and layout and blocking shots and things like that. Are there pieces of that are already built in, or what's a suggested workflow for using AnimeStudio for even, you know, a 30-second short or ad or something like that?
You know what? That is a very good question, and it's really unique to the user, and it really depends. What's really interesting is we in the past assumed that somebody would storyboard on paper, and then what they would do is they would bring in their storyboard into the application as images just going through while they're animating. So let's go back to this character and this animation here. I'll play it. But what happens is, so for instance, usually people right here would put a little set of images that they've drawn in and that they would go through just to show the storyboard on how something like this particular scene would look like. And so they would import that as an imported image that they would just leave on the side. And they could draw that on paper, in Manga Studio, in Photoshop, wherever.
Right.
But what's really unique is we've actually seen it the other way around as well. So for instance, you have a very high-end Pixar animator or Disney animator, and they want to get their concept to their bosses immediately as far as how the scene should look like in, let's say, RenderMan or one of the applications that Disney uses. So what they do is they use AnimeStudio as a quick and dirty tool to put things together, and then they use the concepts in AnimeStudio and its rigging mechanism, because it's so fluid and easy to use, as a means for an animatics showcase to their producer or director for an end product in one of their applications. Great. So we're seeing it on the front end as well as on the back end.
Interesting. So the whole use of paper to do an animatic can almost completely go away when you've got this much capability, particularly with the bone rigging and the presets already in place.
Exactly. It really depends. And that really shocked us when we were watching demonstrations of studios. We, in fact, had a little while ago when we were deciding on what features we wanted to implement in version 10, we communicated with some of our beta testers, and some of these folks were in major studios, and they showed us how they used AnimeStudio. Well, about 50% of them use them a certain way, and then another 50% use it another way. It was really shocking for us to see that. And they ultimately used another product for the end result, but they needed AnimeStudio to convey that message. And it was quite unique to see that. And they said they would not have been able to produce the final animation fast enough if they couldn't get their concepts out without using it as an animatic sort of tool.
I have
storyboarding.
Two questions
sure.
that come up, and one is about classic, the Disney invention of panning, where you have multiple layers moving at different speeds to give the illusion of 3D space, and that's question number one. And then the second question is the implied or faked depth of field perception. Again, so these are camera issues rather than, let's say, rigging or character issues. And how do you achieve that in this two-dimensional environment?
I was actually going to show you. Let's bring up a couple scenes here for you. Once again, hopefully I can get to it right here. This is a good one. So have a look at this animation here. So you see this character jumping from rooftop to rooftop, and you would assume that it's all flat. But as soon as I twist this around and put it in 3D mode, you'll notice that these are actually staggered one behind another.
Exactly.
You see that?
Yep.
So that's how you can achieve it. So you can actually do that depth of field concept in AnimeStudio, no problems. And then, okay, yeah, so you can go through the depth of field with the cameras right here on the left-hand side here in the tools bar. So you have all that concept of moving through, let's say, a forest or in between buildings here. So you can probably see this a little bit more clearly right there. See this little character jumping from building to building. We're working on a 2D canvas, but we have that depth of field here. All of these buildings are actually staggered one behind another. So if I reset this view, you're looking at this character jumping in. It's as though it's just jumping from, one building to another building, but really it's not in 3D, but in fact it really is.
Right.
So yes, so AnimeStudio supports a lot of export options as well, AVI, MOV, obviously sequential images, which a lot of users do use, and some of them, in fact, export into PNG with the alpha channel, and then what they do is they do some of their compositing in other programs like After Effects and what have you. So we're very friendly we're very friendly with other applications.
Is there any suggested file length? Again, in terms of thinking of workflow, if you were going to do, let's say, a 20-minute animated piece, would you suggest building it scene by scene by scene by scene, and then doing the building in Premiere or Final Cut or something like that? That's more geared towards a whole longer-term type project, or do you feel like AnimeStudio Pro can handle something with such long development time?
It could definitely be done that way, as far as AnimeStudio being, the tool to be used for start and all the way to the end of the animation for the complete 20-minute length video. A lot of people end up using Photoshop, or sorry, Adobe products like Premiere or Final Cut because they just like the way things work in there. They can add some extra effects if they'd like. So either is available. I would suggest whatever someone's comfortable with. So if they're comfortable with doing some compositing and clean up stuff at the very end with a tool like Final Cut, then let them do so. And the program allows them to do that. Some people end up doing some of their audio voice overs in a program like that versus AnimeStudio because they're just accustomed to it. It's whatever they feel comfortable with.
Right, but the program, I guess my point was that the program really is not limited to timeline. You could really do a full length. In theory, you could do a whole full length feature, whatever you consider full length, right there. And of course, if the computer has the memory capabilities and storage to handle that size project.
Exactly, it's really up to your capacity of your computer. Like right in this instance, I have multiple tabs open. If I was maybe on a lower end Pentium, it could be a little bit taxing on the system. It really depends on your computer and all that sort of stuff. But I've seen it both ways. And but with AnimeStudio Pro, you are unlimited as far as length is concerned, and even size. You could do a 10,000 by 10,000 pixel animation if you really want to.
So you're ready for 4K.
Yes, whatever you want.
Great. Well, cool.
And in fact, before we go off, what I actually wanted to show you was some full-length movies. Okay, so we're still sharing our screen. Perfect. Okay, so this is another application or another animation, full-length animation called L'Art de la Felicità, created by an Italian studio, and they used Poser in conjunction with AnimeStudio and brought in a bunch of rigs and rigged up a lot of characters in AnimeStudio and started animating and produced a full-length movie in AnimeStudio.
Great. What's the name of the film again?
It's called L'Art de la Felicità. I can provide you a link to that.
Great.
And then finally, one last thing I'm going to talk to you about, and then I'll let you go, is a very, very cool animation that was created in AnimeStudio a few years ago by a team called Freakish Kid.
Mm-hmm.
And if you check it out, obviously it's a French animation, but this team only uses AnimeStudio, and they released this full-length movie, and it got quite a bit of acclaim. It's called La Reine du Soleil, the Queen of the Sun.
It actually looks familiar.
And yeah, it was created in AnimeStudio. And these guys, last I talked to them, they've gone a little bit black, or dark, I should say, not black, have gone dark. And the reason for that is they're working exclusively with Disney. And the last message I got from them is that Disney is using AnimeStudio with our feature animations, and that's the most of, or the most I could tell you, basically. They couldn't tell me anymore because everything at Disney is very secretive.
Yes. Understood.
So it's amazing to see, you know, AnimeStudio being used all over the place, from commercials, which we were talking about earlier in our presentation, all the way up to full-length movies.
Great. As I say, it looks like I think it's a terrific product, and I thank you for the the walkthrough, and especially highlighting the newer features and the very, very useful features for both the budding animator and for the experienced one who really wants to get a handle on getting into the storytelling and not having to do those drawing after drawing after drawing, or even handling the rigging. This great tools you've got here. So looks very, very good. Yep.
Thank you so much. Yes, we appreciate your time so much, Dean.